So before we dive into today's episode, I want to give you guys a reminder, or maybe this is the first time you've heard about it, for the scholarship that is going to close on Monday, May 10th, 2021. So this is a chance for a spot. I'm giving away one spot to this $997 value. It is the Purposeful and Profitable Business Mentorship Program. It's my signature 3-month one-on-one coaching program where I help you lay the foundation for your business, making sure you're really clear on where God is leading you, and help you really get all of your routines set up and fully step in to the life that God is calling you to. And I'm here to coach you all along the way. And this is my gift to one of you, is a spot to that program. So I would love to support one of you in this way. The applications are already coming in. So if you want a chance at that, go to mamawithacalling.com/scholarship. And I'll be in touch with you next week and then be announcing the recipient soon after. All right. That's my reminder for you guys. And let's get into today's episode. If you're feeling God call you to pivot life as you know it by leaving your career plans to start an online business, and you're terrified of how you'd ever actually pull that off, then you're a mama with a calling, and this is the podcast for you. Here's where we'll talk about everything from choosing the right business and running it as a mom to biblical inspiration and motivation to conquer your fears. Because even though it's causing you some anxiety, you're also excited because you know God's calling you to it. And that means you're headed to a life with more joy, fulfillment, and purpose like you've always wanted. Hi, I'm Alexia Carrillo, fellow mama with a calling, and I'm passionate about helping other moms like you step into their calling and not stay stuck in their career for fear of going against the grain. I believe it's okay to pivot and follow God's calling on your life without the guilt or shame for not doing what the world says you should do. This is the Mama with a Calling podcast, where we'll figure out how you can actually make this wild calling on your life become a reality. Let's grab some coffee and dive in. Hey guys, welcome back to the Mama with a Calling podcast. I'm Alexia, and today I'm excited to talk to you about the podcast. Really meta, right? So talking about a podcast on a podcast. But I hear from a lot of people in my free Facebook group or just online in general that they are interested in starting a podcast, but the tech or maybe just the idea of starting a podcast is a little bit intimidating. So today I wanted to come on here in celebration of reaching over 2,000 downloads on the podcast. Yay! Thank you guys so much for listening and sharing and all the things. It's really exciting. So I wanted to talk to you about why I wanted to do a podcast in the first place. So I am a podcast lover. Like, I love podcasts. I have been listening to podcasts for years and years and years, like before podcasts was even cool. Back in grad school, I used to use it. And really, I started in college when it wasn't called podcasting then, but it was just like the talk radio shows. I used to listen to Focus on the Family, which is kind of funny that I did that as a college student, but I was trying to learn more about like having a family one day. I don't know. And when I got into grad school, I started listening to things like on NPR, listening to like This American Life or Snap Judgment or Radio Lab. I did get my PhD in science, so I am a science nerd. So I love Radio Lab. It's so cool. But those were just kind of like for fun. Then when I started stepping my toe into the world of being an entrepreneur, I found a whole world of podcasts that could teach me all about how to be an entrepreneur, from mindset to how do I get started with my business, strategy and email marketing and all the things. And what I loved about it is it was the way I felt like I was growing my business, though trick there. You're not really growing your business, but you are building yourself up, building your mindset, learning things. And I would listen to podcasts to and from work. So while I was still, dreaming of being at home, but not quite there yet, I would listen to podcasts every single day. And I had like an hour and something commute into Nashville. And I would just listen to podcasts. So as I started to develop my own opinions and beliefs and all these things, and started to really hone in on what I wanted to teach and where I felt like God was calling me, I was like, I would love to be that person in someone's ear, because I know how valuable a podcast has been for me. I mean, I learned so much, and I retained it well. It just was such a great time. Just me and my podcast in the car, because I was just learning, and I was like, it's fine if it takes an hour to get home. I am enjoying, this information from these like people that became like business mentors, and they don't even know it. So I was like, I just could envision me sitting here talking to someone, to the women out there who are listening to this, and being that voice of hope and encouragement and teaching them things and inspiring them. And that was so exciting. But it was also felt really scary. I had the idea to have a podcast 2 years before I actually started the podcast. And the things that really held me back are probably some of the things that you can relate to. So I just wanted to kind of share those with you so that maybe you can relate, and also to encourage you that even if those fears are there, yes, they're real, and let's acknowledge those. But also, it doesn't mean that you can't get started. So the biggest fear was the tech, right? Like not knowing, sitting where I was, I just had no clue. Like how do you get a podcast on the podcast app? Like what are all the steps, right? And that was a big hurdle for sure. And I would research and look up free stuff and just trying to understand. And there's a lot of different opinions. And I just wasn't really quite sure how to get started. Now, another fear was the fear of actually being heard, which is kind of funny because that's the point, right? You want to be heard. You're there to inspire and encourage. But if I'm being honest, there was also this fear that, oh my goodness, people will be listening to me. There are going to be people on the other end that are going to be listening to my words. And while I was so excited about that potential, it also was just different, right? I mean, I literally was a scientist. Like, I didn't really talk to people much. As a scientist, we have to give conferences and give seminars and different things like that. But it's not an everyday thing that you are leading and guiding, especially at the level that I was. I wasn't there yet. And so just switching to being this person that would be teaching and inspiring who knows how many people, because I have no control. Like if I'm going to a seminar, only the amount of people that can fit in the room can hear me, right? And even as a teacher, so I was a teacher for 3 years, a high school teacher. I was teaching high school in collaboration with the university, and that time prepared me for even my podcast, because I got really comfortable standing in front of a room of people that I didn't really know, in the beginning of the school year, and like teaching them something that was complicated or might be something that I know I want them to know, but they may not know they want to know it yet, things like that. But in a podcast, I don't know how many people are going to listen to this. It could be thousands. It could technically reach, millions of people, and it could reach people for years to come, right? It just lives on. So that was actually really scary. Now, I'm not saying all of that to put that new fear into your mind, but I just want to acknowledge that that's a real thing. If that is welling up for you, or maybe you didn't even know that was a fear, just know that it is a thing, but it's also a really great thing, right? It's completely normal to have a little bit of that in there. It's like getting up and talking to people. But remember, this is something that God is calling you to, and He wants you to be heard, right? He's not calling you to be silent. And the third big one was the fear of the opposite, which is that no one would listen. And I think that a lot of times we actually think that's the biggest fear, is that, well, no one will listen or no one will care what I'm saying. But I think that really at the end of the day, all of these excuses, if I was honest with myself, they were just excuses. They were just reasons that I didn't even want to move forward. And I let them stop me from being able to share what God was laying on my heart every day. I had so many ideas. And finally, I'd ignored God long enough, and I was actually at a temporary job. So I had went back to work for just a short season, couple of months. And I realized that I had been saying no to what God wanted me to do over and over and over. And I think that's one of the reasons that I actually ended up back at a job. I felt like God was giving me the okay to do that, and I did it. And during that whole season, it was about 3 months. During that whole season of being at that job, I just was very aware of the things that God had been calling me to before that I no longer was talking about. And I talked about this in episode, I think it's like 1 or 2, if you want to go back and listen to that. But I decided that I was done saying no, like no. And this was right after COVID and everything kind of shut down. I was like, this is it. Like, my husband had been laid off. I was at home. We both were at home. Everybody's at home. My son's at home. We're all here. And I was like, there's no reason that I can't do a podcast. Like, I just felt very strongly that it was needed, especially amongst, like, while COVID was happening, people are being letting go from their jobs. And I just started thinking, how selfish of me to not put out the content that I know God is putting on my heart just because I'm a little bit nervous or I have these fears. So basically, I started thinking less about myself, aka how I might sound or what I might say. And I really shifted my focus to what do people need to hear right now? Because I saw so many women feeling scared and feeling like either scared about losing their job or they were actually having to go to work even though they had a side hustle, even though all this time they wished that they had started their online business. And now they were faced with this situation where they felt really, really trapped, right? You have to go to work and there's this virus. And this is at the beginning of COVID. So I feel like there was a lot of fear there. And I was even talking to the women at work around me and how they were having some of those thoughts too. Like, they were so just upset that they had to come in, right? Because of the money. I remember telling one of the women, I was like, I'm not worried about it because I know how to make money online. And shortly after that, I quit that job and I started working on how can I get this podcast launched and out the door. So the first thing I did was I got the right resources. So I was able to get a course, get a little bit of coaching around how to start a podcast and how to map out my episodes and what to talk about and all the things. And at the end of the day, the tech was not as complicated as I expected. I honestly just grabbed an old little, and I'm still using it now, an old little USB mic. I think it's like from Radio Shack, if that tells you anything about how old it is. I mean, it's probably a couple years old. And I ordered this pop filter from Amazon. And it's like a little filter that hooks to the mic so that my P's and things like that don't make a pop noise. And then I'm recording right now on a platform called Audacity, and it's free. And then I use Podbean as my host, which is also free. And I just made my own cover art in Canva and I was good to go. And I put up my podcast and it was such an amazing feeling. First of all, the first episode, of course, was really, really challenging. But after that, it's just a matter of continuing to show up. And honestly, if God has put it on your heart, the content is just going to flow. I have so many ideas for podcast episodes. It's insane. I often create content that I feel God is leading me to create with my listeners in mind. So it's not just things that I want to talk about, but actually things that God is speaking to me about. So with this podcast, I just passed 2,000 downloads, which I'm so excited about. You guys are a part of that. Thank you for listening and sharing it. And I just wanted to share a little bit about how that happened. And if you're interested in starting a podcast, like I said, I created content that was about you guys, right? It's what I felt God was leading me to talk about. And if it had anything to do with helping moms in their business or changing their mindset to embody and embrace a Christian biblical mindset around their business, or business tips or whatever it was, I was like, I need to share this back out. Like, I have that feeling all the time. And the podcast is a great way to share like a story or whatever it is you're feeling, like a message that you have for someone. And I just constantly ask myself, like, what do I think you guys need to hear? And also coming at it with a servant's heart versus pride, right? So again, thinking about you guys and the listener on the other end and not worrying about how I sound or if I'm the most intelligent or whatever. It's all about what your listeners need to hear. And then the third final piece of, that's helped the podcast is telling people that the podcast actually exists. So I email my list. I have an email list that you should be on. If you go to momwithacalling.com, you'll see different ways to join there. There's freebies that I have. There's some Bible verses, different things. I'll put a link in the show notes for that. And also on social media, and then on Pinterest. I do pins, like bringing people to the podcast, and also reviews. So when you guys do a review for the podcast, it actually tells Apple that, hey, people are liking this podcast, so much so they gave a review for it. And it pushes it up in the algorithm so that other people, it will show the podcast to others. And so the more you guys share, the more you guys talk about it, the more you do a review, all of that helps the podcast reach more people. The exciting thing about the podcast, or having a podcast, is I've seriously gotten more messages, replies, comments from you guys saying, oh my gosh, this podcast is amazing. Oh my goodness, it's exactly what I needed to hear. This has helped me so much as I'm trying to start my business, or this has helped me so much. I'm still in my 9-to-5 and I don't want to be. Like, because think about the power of a podcast, right? Like, you are in someone's ear. And like I said, maybe you're driving somewhere and like you're listening to me or anybody else, and that creates this connection. It's almost like a relationship without even really knowing the person, because it feels like we're chatting, right? So I've actually even had clients come from the podcast. So straight up, they heard me on the podcast. They started following on Instagram or something. They message me, we get on a coaching call, and they've purchased things from me. So having a podcast isn't just about talking into a mic and hoping somebody hears, and this is something I cover in my coaching program, where, you don't want to do anything online without it having an ultimate purpose of leading people to your services or products. Now, I'm not saying you can't do anything that's free. I'm just saying that podcast content is free, but it's here to serve you. But as we all know, we don't take something seriously until money is exchanged. It's a lot easier, right, to pay and show up at the gym if you're paying for a membership versus if you just got to go out here and walk around the neighborhood. Which one? It's a lot easier to show up for something you pay for, because when you exchange money, it means I care about this so much that I'm giving over money for this. There's the verse that, where your heart is, there your treasure is also. So I hope that encourages you guys. I just wanted to do that quick episode to share with you how I launched a podcast, how it got to over 2,000 downloads, just some of that marketing stuff and just consistency and putting out content. I'd like to put out more episodes for sure, but the more episodes you put out, the more downloads you can get. And just how it can be a part of your business, that if God is leading you to it, He's going to speak through you using the podcast. So I want to remind you guys that if you're listening to this live, May 10th is the last day for the application to the scholarship for free 3-month one-on-one coaching program with me. I'm awarding one spot to that. And to apply for that, just go to mamawithacalling.com/scholarship. And there's just a short little application there. And I would love to support one of you in this way. If podcasting is something that you're interested in, I could definitely coach you through that, figuring out what you like, getting over your fear of starting, helping you continue to make progress on the podcast and what to talk about, marketing, and all the things. So I will see you guys next week. And until then, keep pursuing your calling. Thanks for listening to the Mama with a Calling podcast. As always, you'll find the show notes for today's episode at mamawithacalling.com/podcast. Really quick before you head out, are you loving these episodes? To make sure this podcast gets in the ears of as many mamas as possible, please head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. I'm going to be reading your reviews on the podcast, so I can't wait to hear from you. Also, if you know someone that needs to hear these episodes, grab a screenshot and share it on Instagram, and don't forget to tag me at Mama with a Calling so I can share it in my stories. Until next time, keep pursuing your calling.